I'm Judy East. I'm the chair of the Nevada County Council of Sierra College Foundation. With respect, we acknowledge the Nevada County campus of Sierra College as the traditional and unceded homelands of the Nisenan peoples. For countless generations, the Nisenan have carried out their responsibility as stewards of this place originally known as Daspa. Sierra College commits to an ongoing relationship with the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan tribe and their future generations, who are an integral part of the Sierra College community.
Thank you, Judy. And thanks to Sierra College for allowing us to put this on for you for free. They give us the facility for free, and our community forums are finishing our second year. I'd like to make note before I get into the presentation, because I'm looking at Pascal, and Pascal is our forum, going to do the forum for next month, and I know you'll want to be here because it's going to center on the future of Miners Foundry, the Center for the Arts, and the new In Concert Sierra facility. So how do we keep the arts alive, and how do 3 performing arts centers survive in Nevada County? That will be the topic. I'm Terry McAteer. I'm the retired county superintendent of schools, and I hope you'd give a warm welcome to Alex Keeble-Toll. Alex is Director of Office of Emergency Services for the County of Nevada, and our County Chief Administrative Officer, Allison Lehman. Thank you. So we're going to talk about wildfires today, and with time remaining, I'll be opening it up to the audience for any questions that you might have that are directly, specifically related to this topic here today. So let's get into it. We have a lot to talk about. And so, Allison, you and I are directly familiar with Measure V. They unfortunately didn't pass. I think it's on. Let's see. Let's see.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Nope. So there's a button down. We'll get this.
I think you just got it. I think I heard you do it. Yeah.
All right, testing 1, 2, 3. There we go.
So, Allison, we're intimately involved in Measure V, and Measure V failed by a few hundred votes, and obviously that was a tax measure to help do wildfire preventative measures. So, since then, could you tell me what did the county then do? You know, you must have regrouped, thought that the tax measure would win, didn't, and so then what happened?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So those of you who aren't familiar with the Measure V, it was a half-cent sales tax that was on the November ballot in 2022, put on there by the Board of Supervisors. And really the goal of the tax was looking at planning and mitigation in terms of sustainable dollars for emergency preparedness. And I think about 50,000 votes were casted, and it failed by 2,000, so it really goes to show that this was an important need, and it continues to be an important need. So even though the measure failed, it continues to be a high priority for the Board of Supervisors, and since then, every year, it has been a board priority objective. The county did regroup, and I really want to point out we actually have 2 supervisors here, and that's Supervisor Tucker and Supervisor Swarthout, and they continue to be strong champions in terms of what are we going to do for a small rural county to leverage our partnerships, be extremely aggressive going out for every dollar in terms of grants. And since then, what we've done is that we have really focused on how do we draw down those dollars. And to date, we have secured over $60 million of grant funding. So the real question is, what does that mean for you? What does that mean in terms of the dollars that are going to translate into your neighborhoods and your Firewise communities? So I'm going to be going down a menu of lists, but the last thing I want to do is for you to think like, okay, that's great. That's a great list of activities. We want to help you connect to those resources, and staff is here, so we have a lot of content for this forum, and we're going to provide a lot of information. But we also brought a team today that are really hoping to continue these conversations after the forum. And if I could ask the county team to stand up, we have our Director of IGS, Craig Griesbach, and Paul in the back.
Oh, they're all up top there. They're all, and so, at the end, they'll be out in front, correct?
They're going to be out in front, and they're here in force, and they're really looking forward to talking to you. So in terms of the $60 million and how that translates, well, first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about, in the forum, about these really large-scale vegetation mitigation projects. But beyond that, there are lots of initiatives, and really this is response to what the community was telling us what they needed. And this includes the green waste events. How many of you have used the green waste events? Oh, fantastic. And we have more of those events coming up this spring. We've had micro grants for fire-wise communities, and this is the Board of Supervisors taking general fund and looking at the fire-wise communities, say, hey, how can we leverage those neighborhoods, the energy, and provide the seed funding that they need to do more. And to date, we funded 54 projects. Little did we know this ended up being a model for other counties. This is an award-winning program, and we give credit to the Firewise communities for all the amazing work and the innovation that has been done to date. After Stormageddon and the big snowstorm, there was lots of debris that left. We saw a lot of downed trees. The grant funding, actually, I believe it was a CAL FIRE grant that was secured. Chief Estes, who's your CAL FIRE chief, he said, hey, county, you need to prioritize the roads. Make sure when you look at the vegetation that you're clearing the roadsides. So with those CAL FIRE dollars, we were able to clean up about 93 miles of county maintained roads, which translated to around 3,000 yards of material. We also were one of the first counties to have a good neighbor agreement. And what does that mean? It is an agreement with the Tahoe National Forest. Does anyone butt up against the National Forest? So if you look at, okay, a couple of you, okay, so you'll know how important this is. So when you look at a map of Nevada County, it's a checkerboard. So this Firewise community could be doing a great job in terms of clearing brush, but the U.S. Forest Service is not doing their job. So what the county, under the Board of Supervisors' direction, what we were able to do is to get this agreement where we could actually look at how can we help and maintain and collaborate in terms of scaling that to really protect those neighborhoods that abut against the U.S. forests. Biomass. We have been talking about biomass for over a decade, if not more. And I'm really pleased to share that we have a pilot project underway and going. It is a public-private sector partnership with PG&E. We have already converted 5,200 tons of large woody material into biochar. And actually that biochar is going to be available now to recycle. We're really targeting our ag community, but it's open to the public as well.
So hold on, Allison, talk about that for a second. So where is this project and what's next steps on the biomass situation? Because you're gonna be churning out a lot of stuff, a lot of debris, woody material, and just what we usually see is it chipped away and shipped out of the county or so. So what's the plan at this point?
Yeah, so I was at the Ag Commission meeting, and the company that's coming in and running this project did a great job explaining in terms of the benefits of biochar. So once they take the material, it can go to our ag community where it actually can be used as a soil amendment. So it is our hope that we just have this full cycle of removing the debris and not just chipping it and leaving it on the forest floor. And then we're able to then help our ag community and our, and others in terms of as a soil amendment.
Now, I also know that you've looked at bringing in some type of biomass plant that burns it in order to create energy. Is that something that's still on the docket?
Yeah, so at this point, we're really leaning on our city partner, Grass Valley. They did pass their fire tax measure, and on the measure, they made a commitment in terms of doing a feasibility study, which is underway with Pioneer Energy, of looking at a biomass project.
Okay.
So we're looking at, okay, if they're going to move forward with that, which is probably, I'm guessing, 3 to 5 years down the line if successful, then we're going to support that effort in terms of making sure that they have the stock to make that sustainable and viable.
Great, thanks.
So another piece of looking at emergency preparedness is also recovery. And what we found through some of our fire events and those who were victims of the fire, it's a long road ahead in terms of that support that they need to either rebuild or get reinstated in the community. And so the county did set up a relief fund, and it's now in partnership with our new community foundation. And I think I saw Scott here, is that? Oh, and Christine, thank you for your efforts. And so we actually have seed funding available where we are able to now support residents in that time of crisis, in that time of need, where they're looking for a hotel or they need a replacement, or once they need to get going in terms of rebuilding. So really proud of our community for stepping up and providing that support proactively. It was actually one of the lessons learned from the Paradise Fire. We had staff go down there and say, hey, what should we do differently? And this was one of the top programs that they said, start preparing now. Because the last thing you want is when there's a huge event, people leave. So we really took that seriously, and we're standing up programs. I'm so grateful to the board of the Community Foundation, who's really championing that effort and leading the way. Now, we could do all we can around planning for emergencies, but when there is an emergency, we need our first responders. So they are really, when I look at, we play the county. We are not firefighters. We do not have a fire department. We are really in a supporting role. So saying that when our Rough and Ready fire station was at risk of closing, it was the board of supervisors who leaned in and said, how are we going to keep this station open, and committed $1 million of gap funding to make sure that station remained open, and it has remained open to this day. And then 2 more points, Terry, because I can feel your energy of moving this on, a lot to cover. We have a campaign, and this is an education campaign for us as community members where we could speak the same language, we could connect. And that is the Ready Nevada County campaign. And this is really to help residents prepare for wildfires and other emergencies. And then knowing that the partnerships are crucial of getting the work done. We are a small rural county, and sometimes I think we forget this. So we're not your Placer or Costco County, and we're definitely not your, Alpine County where we're super small, but we're still a rural county. So all these programs, we know this is a big issue and it's a big challenge. And we're going to continue creating programs within our resources. But it's really going to be also, if we're ever going to get there, and it's going to be an ongoing commitment, we're going to have to leverage our partnerships. We're going to have to lean on all of us for personal responsibility, and we really are going to have a unified approach. So those is the menu of services that we've done since the measure in 2022. But like I said, let this be a conversation starter for today, and take advantage of talking with staff, talking to myself. I already had a wonderful conversation with a woman who said, I'm like in this limbo spot of not being a Firewise community. It's like, yeah, let's talk about it. Let's see how we could problem solve together. So thanks, Terry.
Great. Thanks, Allison. So Alex, last month we had a panel here of a bunch of firefighters and lessons learned from LA. As the Office of Emergency Service Coordinator here, Director, tell us, what lessons have you rethought relative to the LA fires?
Sure. So I think Allison really hit the nail on the head when she was saying that we're not first responders, and really the best thing we can do as residents is make the job of first responders easier. So those were the lessons that really I'm thinking about in the aftermath of the LA fires. There's a few different things that came forward: home hardening, water infrastructure, and evacuation as like big major pillars of what could have potentially been done better. So let's kind of unpack those. But first, let's recognize that our fire environment in Nevada County and our density of structures is very, very different. So we are not dealing with the same circumstances, and it's not just a one-to-one in terms of what could we do differently. LA obviously has very dense residential structures. We find that a few places in Nevada County, but most places were much more dispersed. They have different vegetation. So they have, the type of vegetation that you think of as being very flammable, because we're talking about different brush species that have a lot of oil in them. We think of them as being things that are going to burn very quick and hot. So those are some of the dynamics there. What can we learn? How can this play out? So lessons that are applicable to our rural forested communities in terms of home hardening. Something that I really thought about is structure to structure fire, and what does that look like when you live in a rural landscape? Because I think structure to structure fire, home to home, but it can also be barn to your house, detached garage to your house, your greenhouse to your house. So when we talk about things like defensible space and home hardening, let's be really cognizant of, if we've got a barn next to our house and that barn ignites and becomes a source of heat to our home, that will ultimately ignite our home. So structures are everything on your property, and when we're thinking about hardening and when we're thinking about our defensible space, we need to take that into consideration. The other aspect is thinking through that zone 0, those first 5 feet around your home, and doing everything you can to reduce any opportunities for that first 5 feet to ignite. So some of the things I think about in our rural community, I'm guilty of this. I've got my raised planter beds. They're made of wood. So they are a wick that will bring fire closer to my house. If I have binder board as a landscaping material, that is a wick that will carry fire closer to my home. So thinking about all these things that might be wicking the fire right up to our home when we're thinking about our defensible space. As far as water infrastructure, this one I found really interesting. There were a lot of concerns around water infrastructure in LA and hydrants potentially functioning, not functioning, there not being water storage places that it could have been. So the first thing I think of, and actually one of our first responders who spent time down in LA had this really great analogy. Our water infrastructure at the end of the day is limited by your pipe diameter that's going into those hydrants. You can't pull out more water than your pipe diameter is going to allow. And what this individual said was you could have had Lake Tahoe behind that infrastructure and you still wouldn't have been able to pull more water out. So I think it's important to understand that, right? If we want to focus on hydrants, for instance, we're talking about a major infrastructure project that would involve ripping up all of our roads and increasing the pipe diameter everywhere. So that's just like context, generally speaking. Then when we think about Nevada County, how many of you in the audience have a fire hydrant that's in close proximity to your home? Okay, that's actually a little surprising for me. So it's a number of you. I would hazard a guess that countywide across our 974 square miles, the vast majority of our rural dispersed population are not in close proximity to a fire hydrant. So when we make assumptions around what tools we might provide to first responders that's going to better position them to defend our homes, that may not be the best option to look to. What we can look at in the context of where we live is what are the things we can do? What are the methods that would be used to fight fire in Nevada County? And how can we create better conditions for that to be successful? So things like removing surface fuel when we know that first responders are likely going to come in and they're going to set containment lines around a fire. If we're removing that surface fuel, we are creating a circumstance where there's less fuel that ultimately has to come in and be bulldozed away to create a fire break, right? We're making that job easier. When we remove our ladder fuel, we're creating so that, all your branches going up your trees, and when we're opening up the canopy, basically creating conditions where you just don't have, tree to tree to tree. When we have an aerial attack and we're trying to drop fire retardant, that retardant will actually make its way down to the surface, creating conditions again where it's going to be safer for our first responders to come in and respond. So those are kind of the context that we're working in. And to reiterate, what we want to do is make it easier for our first responders to safely and effectively do their job. And then a final thing, when we're thinking about where do we focus our attention if we want to protect our homes? So many of you in this room were part of our Community Wildfire Protection Plan update. And you probably are familiar with the map behind me, which we're going to go through a bit later. When we did our Community Wildfire Protection Plan update, when you're just looking at hazard, fire as a hazard, you're looking at 3 things. You're looking at weather, you're looking at topography, and you're looking at fuel. And that's kind of going to be what drives fire. So countywide, our most hazardous locations are our river canyons. I think for pretty obvious reasons. They're very steep, wind will pull up and down them, there's very challenging vegetation. Those are also the places where we see our highest recreational uses during the summer. They're places where there would be likely to be ignitions. And so when we're thinking about where we're placing these fuel mitigation projects, where ultimately we're hoping our first responders will be able to make a stand between fire in our homes and protect our loss of life and property, placing our fuel mitigation projects where we know fire is going to be coming from and where we can stop it before it gets into our communities, it makes good sense, and it's backed up by some of the best available science. The final thing with the LA fires, the importance of evacuation, and I think this is really the big one. Key lesson there. People who chose to not evacuate when there were warnings or when there were orders are people who ultimately end up unable to evacuate. And unfortunately, lives were lost for that reason. As residents, we far outnumber the number of first responders in Nevada County, right? There are tons of residents and this, limited number of fire professionals, and they're relying on us to know what to do. They're relying on us to have our go bags packed. They are relying on us to have understood which evacuation routes are available to us. They're relying on us to be signed up for Code Red so we get those emergency notifications. They're relying on us to know our zone so that when we get that notification, we know if it applies to us. And so we can play that role. We can be prepared. And in OES, we know through our Community Wildfire Protection Plan survey that evacuation is like the most important thing to Nevada County residents. And so we need to lean into this personal responsibility piece around evacuation. So that's what each of us can do. Then what is OES doing? As Allison mentioned, we've got a number of different projects that are funded right now. We have 10 grants, which total $17 million, that are directing funding towards approving evacuation routes. So when we talk about our shaded fuel break projects, I think many of us picture like, oh, that's landscape, it's just out where maybe the fuel is most dense. Those projects are designed specifically around primary ingress and egress, so ways people are going to get out and first responders are going to get in, almost universally. We're looking at those primary evacuation routes, and so when we think about a project like our Woodpecker Ravine project, so 410 acres below Empire Mine State Historic Park, kind of between 174 and Rattlesnake Road. All the parcels that are included in that project, it's private parcels, they intersect with primary evacuation routes. Because the idea is clear that vegetation 150 feet on either side of those main routes, 75 feet on either side of those secondary routes. You're creating conditions where it's easier to safely defend as a first responder, but you're also creating conditions where it's safer for residents to get out.
So Alex, a lot of oxygen there. Let's focus in on your slides, because I know you have some wonderful things to be able to show people that of projects that you're undertaking. So why don't we go through those projects for a few minutes?
Okay, let's stand up because
Please
it's
do.
really awkward to be spinning
Yeah,
on a stool.
spinning.
I'm swinging my legs like a child. Okay, so, and I have to say, credit to our CWPP update really goes to our County Wildfire Coordinator, Alessandra Zambrano, who did a fantastic job, and she really spearheaded this analysis. So what we're looking at here, we did a few things for the CWPP. We looked at the wildfire hazards, so that climate, topography, and fuel piece. And then we recognized that places in our county that might be considered the most hazardous, they may be in the middle of Tahoe National Forest. They may not have proximity to where we live and play as people and to the things that are important to us. So in addition to looking at hazard, we overlaid that hazard with basically 3 buckets that are important to our community. Community lifelines, so things like infrastructure, but also schools, post offices, everything that makes community life go round. Community health, which is things like if the forests were burning, would you be exposed to PM 2.5, so those fine particles that are going to get in your lungs? Would it burn a hydraulic mine site where afterwards you would have maybe mass wasting or landslides of soil? So community health, and then finally natural resources, because they're integral to our economy, they're integral to our experience as Nevada County residents. So things like, watersheds and reservoirs that are publicly accessible. We overlaid all of those things, so when you're looking at this map and you're seeing the darker green, you're seeing the overlay of all 3 of those, and the lighter green too. And then we've got all these projects. And so what you can see is where these projects are placed are basically protecting our community centers and aligned with our priorities.
So down here at the bottom, in that pink with kind of the pink squiggles, that's Woodpecker Ravine. 2 projects, actually 3. 410 acre shaded field break project that we are actually going to be breaking ground on in April. 726 acre shaded field break that we will be doing planning this next year. And then building resilient infrastructure in communities, which is 1,500 parcels that will be eligible for defensible space and home hardening. In the lighter pink, we have a project that we actually applied for on Friday. That is the You Bet Resilience Project. It's our newest project that is the first major project that we're pushing out of our community wildfire protection plan based on priorities that were identified. A ton of roadside vegetation abatement, piloting some really innovative ways to rank private roads. Moving up, this is a Banner Mountain Cascade Shores ingress project, because we know that folks on Banner Mountain and in Cascade Shores are some of our more evacuation impacted communities. They kind of really rose to the top as one of the 5 most impacted communities through our evacuation study. So that is a proposed project where we've said, okay, there's a need here. Up at the very top, we've got 2 different colors of pink. One of them is the South Yuba Rim Hazardous Fuel Reduction Project. That is a 5,600 acre planning area, and we are wrapping up that planning in June, and then it'll be 800 acres of priority treatment within there. And then there's a kind of a darker pink. That's 1,800 acres of treatment on BLM land that's nested within there. They're not part of the same project because the larger pink is federally funded, and you can't use federal funds on federal land, so the other BLM parcels are actually state agency funded. Working our way further around, more pink, lots of pink. That kind of darker salmon block, that's the Sierra Foothill Forest Climate Resilience Project. That is in the Jones Bar Firewise community, so looking to address post-fire impacts and how do we ensure that after a fire, we're managing vegetation in a way that creates a resilient community structure. That's about 625 acres. Then we've got these squiggly lines around Lake Wildwood. This is the first large-scale project that's coming out of our evacuation study. It's specifically addressing that evacuation impacted community of Lake Wildwood. We're actually bringing the planning phase of that project to the Board of Supervisors for fund acceptance next week. It's 1,000 acres of roadside treatment and then some up and down Deer Creek Canyon, but we're talking about Pleasant Valley Road, Mooney Flat Road, doing that treatment around places that will create better evacuation opportunities for Lake Wildwood. And then finally, 2 kind of orange fingers coming down. The top one is 300 acres of new treatment in the Ponderosa West Grass Valley Phase 2 project area. And then we're doing 600 acres of maintenance treatment in the original Ponderosa Phase 1 project, which was 1,200 acres. So that's our suite of projects, and they're really, again, to reiterate, laid across that landscape that was identified based on the hazardous places, but also what's important to you as community members.
Did you want to go through any other slides?
Yes, I can go through a few more. We really think about our projects as being at the individual, community, and landscape scale, because those are the different scales where we have opportunities to make change. So, Allison mentioned community green waste. Our 2025 community green waste events kick off April 28th. There'll be 5 consecutive Mondays at the McCourtney Transfer Station from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. They are completely free. We're also working to deploy green waste bins into fire-waste communities based on some of those priorities that came through the evacuation study. We have Ready, Set, Snow and Ready, Set, Go. As Allison mentioned, we had that a couple years actually of those really tough winter storms. And so it's important to connect those two, because when we have tough winter storms and we're not able to clean up after them, that means that we've got increased vegetation, which creates a fire hazard later in the year. And then finally, Brick Phase 1 will be in planning, and that's the project I was mentioning that's 1,500 parcels that will be eligible for defensible space and home hardening. At the community scale, the Sierra Forest Foothill Climate Resilience Project, that's the one that's in the Jones Bar Firewise community. That's in implementation. We are wrapping up planning under our roadside vegetation project, which is about 200 miles of roadside vegetation along county maintained roads. And then we have this great project that we'll be in planning this next year, and that's our critical evacuation route project. This is one that I think many of you are excited about. It is for $20,000 grants to Firewise communities, HOAs, nonprofits, agencies, We're starting to tee up that process, and we're going to be releasing a request for proposals for public feedback next week. And we're doing that because we want to hear from you as we're designing this program, that the way we're identifying priorities makes sense and that this is going to work for you. So we're following the model that state agencies use, where before we actually release that proposal, we're going to give you an opportunity to tell us, like, yes, this works, or no, more of this, or this doesn't make sense. Finally, at the landscape scale, these are all of our landscape scale projects, which, as I mentioned, even though we talk about them as being landscape scale projects, they are by and large specifically addressing evacuation constraints. All the way down to our good neighbor agreements on Tahoe National Forest. Those good neighbor agreements are allowing us to work on and adjacent to Tahoe National Forest lands, but with a focus on roads. So for Western Nevada County, we've got $1.7 million to do work on about 400 acres along Forest Service roads coming out of where the South Urim Hazardous Fuel Reduction Project is, so kind of coming along the San Juan Ridge and then headed towards the little town of Washington and down and around that area. And this is the last project that I'm excited about because this is the new one, the Penn Valley Project, which is really, it's so exciting to come up with these strategic plans, to go through the process, to get the feedback, and then to be able to write really effective programs and then get it funded and get it on the ground.
Thanks, Alex. So, Alex, where are most of these funds coming from? Allison mentioned 60 million. Where are these funds coming from? Come on in, slide on in here.
Start kicking my feet again. So they are coming from a variety of sources. So we have both state and federal funding. So we have a number of FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant Program grants, so FEMA HMGP. We have, so I think we've got 7 of those right now. We have 4 U.S. Forest Service grants. We have our good neighbor agreements with Tahoe National Forest, which is also U.S. Forest Service, so that's federal funding. And then at the state agency level, we have funding from the Wildlife Conservation Board, from CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE has been one of our biggest, most consistent supporters because their mission aligns with protection of loss of life and property. And then Sierra Nevada Conservancy funding. And it's important to point out, like, these state agency funders like Wildlife Conservation Board, and they're addressing, fuel mitigation. When you live in a rural forested environment that has abundant natural resources such as ours, anytime you're doing work on that landscape, you are ultimately doing some sort of forest management. If you're doing watershed protection, you're also kind of doing forest management. If you're doing habitat protection, or you're addressing specific sensitive species, you also have an opportunity there to do, fuel management. So we're really trying to broaden the number of funders that we can entice to enter this conversation and do this work with us, because we don't need to be limited to funding sources that are specifically for fire or forest health, because we can work across this landscape in a variety of different ways to meet multiple benefits, and it doesn't have to be just about fire. It can be about resilience.
Great. And Allison, if you don't mind, a lot of these I heard were federal. So you're obviously talking with a lot of your counterparts regarding federal funding and securing it, and how secure is it? And so what are you hearing out there about some of your grants or even some of your programs with the county regarding federal funds?
Yeah, absolutely, and I want to respond to that. But first, I want to point out, in terms of $60 million in our grant portfolio and how meaningful that is for our community. Unlike county or government services, you get an allocation from the state or an allocation from the federal government to provide those services. When it comes to these programs, there's not an allocation that's available that you could depend on from the state. That is why many communities go out for some type of tax. I am so proud of our team, and especially Alex, who has seriously been a bulldog. When I said that we've been aggressive and assertive going out there, it is because of Alex and her team. She's wicked smart, and we're so fortunate to have her in our community.
Wicked smart, wow.
All right, let's talk about federal funding. So really what we're hearing and seeing is what all of you are hearing and seeing. We've had actually conversations with U.S. Forest Service staff. They've had actually lots of different people in leadership positions. I want to count 4 in the last 6 months, so it's been really hard to get information. The current grants that we have now, there's no indication that they're in jeopardy. We have not heard that we have to be concerned in terms of this funding being frozen. There are other programs in our county, and the Board of Supervisors will be entertaining a board letter that outlines that. That's actually available now on the county website in the Board of Supervisors packet, which outlines all the impacts that we are looking at in terms of federal funding. But in terms of these grant projects, there's no indication that they're in jeopardy at this point.
So staying on, going from federal to state, the state of California's budget is in tough straits again. And so my question is, do you feel that we're getting a fair share from Sacramento? Oftentimes rural California feels like, we're not high on the pecking order. How do you feel about wildfire issues relative to the governor's budget and all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think per capita we're doing extremely well. All these grants are competitive, and as you could see from what Alec just outlined, we have about 3, 4, 5 years of phased projects, and these are large scale projects. So we're really hopeful that things will, fire and emergency preparedness will continue to be a high priority for the state of California, and that resources will be available.
Great. Alex, let's go back to you for a second. A lot of people have concerns about homelessness in the community and the relationship between the homelessness community and fires. So could you address what is the county dealing with that issue? I know that maybe more related to cities, but how are you involved and how much planning is in this unknown of transient residents living out in the forests?
Yeah, so I can speak to that a couple of different ways. And before that, I just want to acknowledge that the nexus between housing and wildfire and our unhoused population, that's probably the single most significant challenge that we face, right? And it's linked to insurance, and it's linked to the landscape we live in. If we can't afford to have homes, and then we live in a wildfire-prone area, what does that look like? So let's just kind of reflect on that, just generally speaking. This is a systemic issue, and I don't have a super good answer in terms of how we address it. Some things that we are thinking about, and I've got this, OES, Emergency Outreach for Unhoused Populations document that we've been passing around kind of in our communication shop around, how do we tackle this? What does this look like? Because at its heart, the challenges that our unhoused population are presenting, they're trying to meet basic human needs. They want to be warm, they want to have food. They're doing these things in places where it's hazardous to have those activities take place. So what can we do, and what am I kind of reflecting on, is how do we better communicate to our unhoused population with solutions? So I always think about, when you parent a child and you say, no, you can't do that, you can't do that. And how, as a parent, that's what you want to say, and then you're thinking, but I'm not offering any solutions. I'm not offering anything constructive. So how can we help our unhoused population better understand the risks that are posed if they are out there making warming fires, cooking food, etc., and what are alternatives that we can offer? So alternatives to stay warm, to have food if you are unhoused. Another thing that kind of has come up is there are these flammable or flame retardant blankets that you can pass out, right? Where if you were out in the woods and you happen to ignite something, you would have a way to sort of immediately suppress. Does that make sense? Large scale zooming out by doing major fuel mitigation projects in some of these areas where there's hazardous vegetation, in particular in our river and creek canyons where unhoused people may be inclined to spend time, we are reducing that risk. And I think as community members, we can also all do our part by finding supportive ways to help our unhoused population understand that we are ultimately all in this together. No one wins if there's a fire, whether I'm unhoused or I have a house. On the whole, and I know that's not a great answer. I think that's because there's not a great answer. I think we're all trying to figure out what is that great answer that both reflects on the humanity of how difficult it would be to be unhoused and how we want to be able to meet our basic human needs, and then, you know, our kind of inclination of like, oh gosh, like don't create something that's going to put my house at risk. So yeah, I apologize that I don't have a great answer for you.
Well, I think we all have the same problem. I mean, we're all dealing with how do we solve this problem? And the county spent a lot of energy, the state spent a lot of energy, and we all know that it's a problem, and to solve it is a difficult one. So thanks for at least that it's high on your radar. So thank you. So sticking with you, the Firewise communities, you seem to have a really great rapport with them, and that you rely on them dramatically. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. Our Firewise communities are our force multipliers. So you guys are literally the people out doing that work on the ground. And we rely on our Firewise communities to give us that place-based information about where the opportunities and constraints exist. And again, to reiterate, that's why we're so excited about the level of engagement we got around the Community Wildfire Protection Plan update, or the level of engagement we got with Firewise communities coming forward with priorities around evacuation that were appendicized in our evacuation study. Because the best way to design good projects that are actually going to get the work that is needed done is to talk to the people who live there. I grew up in Nevada County, so I've been here more or less my whole life. There are tons of places in Nevada County that I had never visited before going out very aggressively as part of our Community Wildfire Protection Plan update to hear from you. Where are these opportunities? Where are these constraints? What does it really look like on the ground? And I try to imagine for someone who hadn't grown up here or who didn't have that sensibility, if you're trying to design a project and you don't even know what the roads look like, you know, you're looking at it on a map and you're going, well, this topography looks challenging, but I don't really know what's going on here. It's one thing to look at Woodpecker Ravine on a map. It is entirely another to drive down to the bottom of Woodpecker Ravine and to the back. So, you know, the tribute of how do we get good projects on the ground are actually getting out there and talking to the people who live there, and those are our Firewise communities.
Great. So Allison, before we get to questions here, I'm not sure where the issue is with the district attorney and the Fire Safe Council and all. So could you tell us the relationship between the county and the Fire Safe Council and where things stand as you know it? Because I think a lot of us feel like we're sort of in limbo on this entity.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. So the Fire Safe Council of Nevada County, even though the name is Nevada County, is not affiliated with Nevada County. It's an independent 501c3 with an independent board of directors. So stating that, we did have a long-term relationship through contracts with the Fire Safe Council. The county no longer contracts services with them. What I know in terms about the investigation with the District Attorney's Office and Department of Justice is actually the same with all of you have read in the paper. So I think any updates, I would definitely call the Fire Safe Council directly or your district attorney.
Okay, so that's interesting, because I think a lot of people think that there's some relationship, but they're really a separate entity unto themselves.
Just like any other 501c3 or nonprofits, you know, we're a small community, we need a leverage partnership. So Nevada County has a long-standing history and record of really looking at how can we partner with our nonprofits to provide a higher level of service. And so the Fire Safe Council at one point was one of those community partners that we partnered with.
Okay. So I think it's about time to go into some questions. Before we get there, is there anything that the two of you would like that I didn't talk about that you'd like to share before we answer any questions?
Yeah, I do, just because actually it was Captain Pettit who sort of brought back a memory of terms of our operations. So I really want to give a peek behind the curtain in terms of how the county operate. So about 2018, it was right on the heels of the Paradise Fire, and it was top of mind. We had our chambers full for a town hall. Did anyone go to that town hall at that time in 2018? And if you remember, we filled the chambers. We put seats out in the lobby. We opened up one conference room. We opened up another conference room. That whole entire building was full. Shannon Moon, your sheriff, came and said, like, hey, we were both new to our positions, and she said, we need to do better. How can we be proactive in terms of emergency service? At the time, you had the sheriff's department that was response, you had emergency services that was planning and recovery. The only time our staff really integrated was in an emergency or if there's a crisis. So we got together and per board approval, we actually seated a sheriff employee in our emergency services department. And the first person that was seated was Captain Pettit. So Captain Pettit was really paved the way for that model. And what that did, it created that continuity. That continuity when there was a crisis or emergency, we had a coordinated approach and a really well-oiled machine. So I just want to share that with you because it is unusual, and actually Placer County has reached out and they're now modeled after that, and I believe Sacramento County is now looking at that model as well. So appreciation to your sheriff for having that foresight and reaching out and making that happen. So we did have a couple of things, and this is the fun stuff. All of you are fully engaged, so I know this is going to be redundant, but it's really important that you are our communication ambassadors. So I know all of you are already signed up for Code Red, correct? So this is our automated system that we need to get every single one of our residents signed up for. So when there is an emergency, you're going to receive a text, an email, or a landline, or a call letting you know the information that you need that is critical for evacuations and the emergency at hand. The second is know your zone. Now, I'm bad at this. So I have a magnet in my refrigerator that has Know My Zone on it, and I have it in my cell phone. But it's also a good reminder to, going to fire season, what is your evacuation zone? Because you're going to have UBANet and the union, your media outlets are going to say, okay, evacuation zone blank is now, or be prepared, this evacuation zone. Is it the perfect system? Absolutely not. But it's the system that we have in hand to really coordinate those evacuations. Find your five. So find your five. All of you, I'm sure, have your five. Actually, I have some relatives here that are part of my five. And these are your allies. These are the people that you check in with. These are the people that you make sure they get support. These are the people that if you have a fire in your area that maybe you could go evacuate to or stay with, and vice versa. And make sure if you don't think someone has their five, reach out and bring them into your cohort, into your tribe, to make sure that we're taking care of our community, especially if it's a senior or someone who may be disabled or isolated. All right, you're in Nevada County when you go to a barbecue and you ask, what's in your go bag? So it's really important to each year look at your go bag. Is it still relevant? My husband and I were talking about this morning, knowing I was going to come here. He goes, God, we really need to look at our go bag, right? Because my kids were little, it's like we had Michael Jordan shoes. Really, do we really need those shoes on the go bag now? But each year we reevaluate. Do you have your important documents? Do you have the medications that you need? Do you have the things that you are going to need so when you go evacuate that you could be sustainable for at least 3 days? Plan your evacuation routes. I live in a network of private roads, and those dead-end roads in terms of gates and people putting rocks, it changes year to year. And so it's really important for you to go out and make sure that those routes are still available. It's also important if you have young drivers or family with young drivers, you need to drive those routes with them. So it's different when you're a passenger versus if you're driving, and it's really important that all of us drive those areas at night so we build up that muscle memory. And then lastly, join a Firewise community. I mean, we talked about force multiplier. That's really how we're going to get the real work done. And really, you're the force multiplier, but you're also the superheroes of our community. So I just want to personally thank you on behalf of Nevada County for your hard work, clearing brush, thinking through, creating strategy, bringing solutions. We depend on you, and we thank you for that.
And I do have one call to action, right? Because Allison just kind of went over all these great materials which we have for you out in the lobby. In addition to the materials that you're probably really familiar with, please do grab one of the small square postcards that's out there. It's got a QR code on it. If you scan that QR code, it's going to take you to a survey where you can provide feedback on which of these materials are really valuable and working for you. What way do you like to receive the materials? Is it helpful if we send them to you? Is it more helpful if we provide them to your Firewise community leaders and you're able to have a conversation about it? So not just what are we giving you, but how are we giving it to you so that you're able to interact with that information. So please do make sure to take those, take extras and disseminate them to your neighbors. We're really looking for your feedback so that we can calibrate our materials to meet your needs.
Okay, now it's over to you. We want to stay on the topic, but we don't want to hear about your backyard problem. Okay, so we want to hear general things. So let's begin right here. Lisa?
Hi, thank you to both of you. I have two questions actually. One is with the Good Neighbor agreement with the U.S. Forest Service. I believe there was something similar happening with BLM because we have a big problem in our Firewise community with BLM parcels. And we've tried a number of different things to try to get action on those and haven't really been successful. So I was wondering if there's...
Could you repeat it?
I will, yeah.
If there's anything on
Sure.
that.
So the question is, outside of the Forest Service stuff, how about all the BLM lands? What are we doing with Bureau of Land Management and their lands throughout our community?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were and are looking to pursue a similar model with BLM as with Tahoe National Forest. And we were in conversation with them all the way up through the end of last year. Unfortunately, BLM has been very much impacted by the federal funding freeze. They had a NOFO, so an opportunity to basically put forward how you would propose to work with BLM. And that got taken down, which means basically the opportunity to enter into that new agreement with BLM is currently on hold. I can tell you that we are proactively finding creative ways to work with BLM to support work getting done on their property. So for instance, under our biomass pilot project, we were able to work with BLM to remove some large woody debris from the South Yuba River campground, which folks up on the San Juan Ridge has identified as being a real problem. We were able this last fall to work with folks in the Greater Champion neighborhood Firewise community on a project that was mutually beneficial with City of Nevada City to remove 37 hazard trees from BLM parcels along Old Downeyville. So we don't have a perfect relationship solution right now, but we do have our eyes on those parcels, and again, that you as community members are bringing forward and bringing to our attention, and we are always looking for creative opportunities.
Lisa, you had yet another point you wanted to make. Are you okay?
Yeah, so on the Appendix A from the CWPP and the evacuation Appendix A, what is the next steps for some of the items that were brought forth during that process that haven't yet been addressed?
So what items are in Appendix A that are now moving forward with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we created that appendix, we were looking to hear from you, right? What are your opportunities and constraints? And we're addressing those in a number of different ways. So for that UVET resilience project, we were able to pull some of those priorities from the evacuation study into a large grant proposal. For some of the other opportunities, when we release that request for proposals next week for public feedback that's on that critical evacuation route, so those $59,000, $20,000 projects, we'll be prioritizing projects that were listed in that Appendix A or in the evacuation study proper or in the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And if other things come forward, send them to us. Again, that square postcard has our OES email on it. These are meant to be living documents. They're not meant to be static and set in stone. So if conditions change or you make new observations, we're always open to that information. It sits there as a repository of input that any opportunity we get, we're pulling it into the projects and programs that we're pushing out.
Great. Yeah. Yes, sir. And then we'll move to you, Jim. Yes.
I don't know if this is relevant, but insurance, you know, do you guys have any leverage? You're paying the fair plan. It looks like there's going to be a 20% increase. And, you know, the thing that bothers me, I have the fair plan where my neighbor doesn't, and if my 20%'s going up, it's significant, where my neighbor's isn't.
Right, so where are you with insurance at this point and dealing with Sacramento, the FAIR plan, et cetera? Is there anything out there that you were seeing? Or just more bad news?
I will start at macro level. This is in our legislative platform, and what does that mean? It means that we have supervisors that are going to the state and then also pushing the feds and going to DC, saying we need to elevate this as a federal issue. It is complicated. The solution's not going to happen at a local level, but I have to tell you, have a champion in Supervisor Hall. And I would say this is probably her #1 issue that she has taken on, and she's sat on many panels, she's had many meetings, and she's not giving up on this issue. She also encourages you to share your story with her, because it's those stories of what you just said, those people are getting priced out of their house because of insurance. We get weekly calls of individuals in our community who are saying that their insurance premiums have gone up. They don't know if they're going to be able to stay in our community. And we want to make sure that we're able to tell those stories to our elected officials and those at the state that can make a difference.
Great. Jim? Yes, 1 second, Mari. Go ahead, Jim.
So we all seem to agree that housing is an issue and we want more. Recently I started counting, because where I live in the city of Grass Valley, traffic is increasing, the roads are staying the same width, and I've counted over 1,000 houses coming online in just the next year or so. I can't imagine that doesn't affect evacuation and other things that are on your plate.
Okay, so we've got a lot of growth occurring in the community. Are all those planned in, how we're going to move all the bodies in evacuation, Alex?
I mean, I can speak to this high level, because really that's a planning question. It's a question for our planning department. Like, if you're permitting new developments, then the evacuation piece comes into play around that being a safe evacuation or a safe approval for that development. So yes, it does get taken into consideration as far as any new development is going to be looking at those different dynamics.
And if the project's in the city, then the city's taking that charge and doing that analysis as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you speak a little bit about what's happening with the infrastructure coming out of the reservoirs and PG&E's failure to prioritize that?
So I know that's sort of an NID question.
It is an NID question.
About reservoirs and
where is
the infrastructure. But you're not involved in that at this point.
No, we're not. But I would recommend highly to go on UBNet. They've done excellent reporting in terms of giving a step-by-step report on where that process is. I know it has elevated to the NID board. I don't see any NID board members here.
Would you repeat the question?
So it's about the reservoirs and the infrastructure that's in trouble these days, especially PG&Es. So the answer is we're not in that. You're not in that. You're not in the water distribution business.
No, high priority for NID. It's been a topic at their meetings. UBNet has written a series of letter articles, and yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I live on the Burma Road, County Road. 3 years ago, there was a plan that had us listed as a date when it was going to be cleared. We're very concerned. Our Firewires community is very concerned about impinging vegetation on the road. It's our biggest threat, we believe. I'm wondering, is there or will there be a priority list issued one of these days that will tell us when Burma Road will come up for roadside clearing?
So the question is about a specific. How will we see? Is there a list available talking about which roads are going to be cleared?
So again, a bit out of my lane here, because this would be Public Works, but what I can tell you is that the Public Works team right now is working on a list of kind of where they're going to go when. And I say that because I had a conversation with them, because there's huge value in, if as OES we're doing fuel mitigation projects on private property, being able to have those projects extend all the way through the county right away up to the county maintained road. So we're trying to get our arms around that as OES. Truckee Fire Protection District is trying to get their arms around that in East County so that we can better work together. So I don't have an exact date for you, And the other thing I will say.
And where would he check? Where would there be a place to check?
You could certainly reach out to the Public Works Department, and then next week, I know at the Board of Supervisors meeting as part of the Emergency Preparedness Charter, Public Works is bringing forward basically a proposal in our charter to do additional roadside vegetation treatment to kind of up their game.
Yes, sir.
On that point, I've contacted them. They're super responsive, and they will tell you if you're asking about a specific project, where it is in terms of, say, this year's calendar. But there's also the option of making a special service request.
Okay,
And
so.
once again, they're super responsive.
So thank you. I'm glad to hear Public Works is so responsive. Yes, sir, and then yes, ma'am. We've got two more. You and you. You're up, sir.
It's pretty clear that we're all in this together, and I wanted to applaud the county's efforts, your efforts, Terry, in making that point. All the issues that you have mentioned are issues that are connected, whether it's the unhoused, the danger of fire, mental health, all of these, and what we need to generate is a spirit of collaboration, of working together, of self-reliance. And as a county and as communities, we need to understand that we need to support one another. The big picture is that we need to become more self-reliant because we can rely less on what is outside of us.
Thank you. And yes, you've got the last question here.
Thank you. We all talk about evacuating, but how do we know where to evacuate to?
Okay, so that's a great question.
Repeat the question.
The question is, we talk about evacuation, but this woman wants to know, where does she evacuate to? And so the question, how do we find that out, Alex?
You don't. Sorry, that's a very flip way of saying it, but the reason why we don't specifically make recommendations on where to evacuate to is because that's going to be entirely dependent on where the fire is, what type of day are we talking about, do we have wind, don't we have wind, how do we expect that fire to behave, and that's why we so strongly encourage everyone to know your evacuation routes. So that way, when you are looking on your trusted media sources, you've gotten that evacuation warning, you know that it's, your zone's impacted. You're looking and, you're looking on, OES Facebook and county Facebook or to our other trusted media partners, to UBNet, KNCO, KVMR, and you're going, oh, okay, I can see where this fire is, and based on that, this is going to be my best option for evacuating from where I am. The trouble, if we tell you you should go specifically somewhere, specifically some way, is what if on that day and in that event, that's the wrong way? And then you've only relied on that singular option, then we've completely misled you. So what I can say the most definitive you can get is figure out what your options are for where you live or where you play.
And I'm going to say, you're sitting right next to Paul and OES, and he is responsible in helping with that messaging. And so I encourage you to talk with him afterwards to talk more about that important issue.
I must be in the zone.
You are in the zone.
So I've got the last two quick questions. Alex, what keeps you up at night as the Director of Emergency Services in this county?
Well, anyone I work with, they're back there laughing because I don't sleep. Which is a me problem, not a stay up at night. What keeps me up at night? I love this place. I love this community. I grew up here. I came back here to raise my kids. I've got kids who went through all the same schools I went to. My mom lives here. My in-laws live here. This is my home. What keeps me up at night is I want it to continue to stay resilient. I want my kids to be able to come back and live here. And I want us all to be able to live here. And it's a huge problem to tackle. And I think in being in this place, we all have to become comfortable with the uncertain. And I've become very comfortable with it. My house could burn down. That could happen. I could be okay with that. I would not be okay with historic downtown Nevada City burning down, the South Yuba River. There are places that I love about this place that it would be too much and I wouldn't want to be here. So that's what keeps me up at night. us as the county or you as Firewise communities, but really back onto like what can we all do? Because I want to be here. I don't want to have to go someplace else.
Allison, as the CAO of the county, on the topic of wildfire, what keeps you up at night?
A big fire event, a big wind event, having that nexus where it's going to be damaging to our residents. And so I have such confidence in this team, and I hope you share that confidence. We're truly doing everything we can. We have a team that cares, who lives here, and coming to work every day, and this is their full-time job to see how we could continue being a resilient community. If I was going to say we are laser focused, my teenage son, is that they are leveling up and locked in. So I think you need to know is that we take this seriously. I give credit to the Board of Supervisors to continue making this a top policy objective where we continue to align resources and staffing to make this a safer community.
And finally, to find out a little bit, so that you're just not public servants, you have a life. Allison, what does Allison do for fun on weekends?
I'm a big hiker, so I love hiking with my friends. I call it trail therapy. We do one big backpacking trip a year, and I'm telling you, 2 years in a row, that's when we had a fire event. And so the last hike that we did was the Lost Coast, and now we're looking at doing the Tahoe Trail this summer.
Great. And Alex, what is the fun part of Alex, who doesn't sleep and who thinks about her job constantly? What happens to you on weekends?
Oh, I'm not very fun. The fun thing I do on the weekend. So I like to run competitively, and so I run a race a month. And my me time on my weekends is going for a long run someplace beautiful. I love my children and I love my husband, but I also like my own head space. And it's such a good way to get out in the community and see what's happening and observe, I don't know, people's flowers blooming in their yards and like different things happening. So that's my happy place right now.
Won't you give them a real warm thank you?
Thank you.
Sorry we kept you an extra few minutes here, but it was really great conversation. And I'll remind you, next April 25th, next month, is about the Foundry Center for the Arts and the In Concert Sierra and how we keep 3 arts venues alive. So anyway, thank you very much. See you next month.